One day I was on the Senate floor when we were not in session. Things were very quiet, and suddenly there was a huge bang at the back of the chamber. I wheeled around just in time to see uh, Senator Ed Fadeley rushing toward the center of the chamber with Senator Mike Thorne leaning over him in a menacing manner. They were both walking just as fast as they could. Thorne was at least 6 inches taller than Fadeley, so it seemed sort of like a large fir tree leaning over uh, a much smaller maple. Thorne was obviously furious. I had never seen him lose his composure that much. One other time I'll describe on another, I will tell about one other time I saw him lose his composure. But it was frightening to see these two large, strong men, Fadeley in his 60s and Thorne in his very early 50s, leaning with Thorne leaning over Fadeley. Physical confrontations were just about unheard of on the Senate floor. It was courtly. So after that, in the afternoon, just as soon as I got a chance, I said to Ed Fadeley, "What happened? What's going on?" Of course, I was majority leader that session, and he and I were confidants. And he said, "Well, there's a practice that Mike Thorne has adopted of holding on to budgets that everybody knows are eventually going to be sent out from his subcommittee on Ways and Means, sent out to the full Senate to be passed, holding on to them to get the maximum amount of what you might call grease of people lobbying him and pleading with him to get these budgets passed because their salary positions or something about benefits, they wanted them. They wanted to have them be secure. And he would let them go toward the end of the session, and they'd come out in a great flood. But in the meantime, he would go home late in the session to what he called cut the wheat. I learned years later that there wasn't much wheat to be cut because Senator Thorne, as many farmers in Eastern Oregon, had put their land into land bank because there was a great surplus of wheat in the United States at that time, and they were being paid not to grow the wheat. But perhaps he had some wheat to cut, but he'd be gone for a week, and then he'd come back and help finish up the session. Well, the newspaper, business-oriented newspapers just loved that. Oh, he was a citizen legislator, and he was so productive, and blah, blah, blah. But Fadeley knew that he had the power to go in as president of the Senate and vote under the rules, vote a budget out as though Thorne were there to do it. Well, I don't want to imply, I never heard that anybody was giving Thorne any money to pass out a budget. This was just gaining influence and appreciation. But in this situation, Fadeley had gone in and voted out a few budgets that Thorne was holding on to. And when he got back from Pendleton, he was told out in the lobby, I guess, by a lobbyist what had happened. And the lobby area was right outside the back door of the Senate chamber, and so he'd come storming in there and slammed that gate open, and I don't know why Fadeley happened to be there in the middle of the room. He usually wasn't, but he was that day, and the confrontation occurred. So Fadeley had robbed Thorne of some of his grease, and Thorne just was furious about it. There's a lot more to this story. Fadeley had finally become president of the Senate when one conservative Democratic rural Democrat changed his vote to join the urban Democrats. We were only one vote short. that vote had blocked Frank Roberts for at least 3 sessions in a row. And when we tried to put forth John Kitzhaber as an alternative, it was the same deadlock. But finally, the rural Democrats voted to send it out, voted to choose Ed. He was the compromise president. What promises he made in private, I'll never know. But he didn't then slant the committees totally in favor of the more conservative members. Mike Thorne was an interesting politician. He'd been Bobby Kennedy's state titular chair of his committee to run for president in 1968. But in 1977, when there was a bill to support creating Martin Luther King Day as a referendum throughout the country, Mike Thorne voted against Martin Luther King Day, which I never forgave him for. He was very conservative, but he was reflecting the business community and the conservative rural attitudes of the people in Pendleton, Oregon. And you can't really blame him all that much for that. But that was the deal. And so we constantly teetered along during the session. Even though Ed was president, it wasn't easy for us to get a majority vote on bills because the coalition of rural Democrats and Republicans was still alive and well. And so it was my job to round up votes to try to push by that coalition. That was the job of the majority leader. And Thorne was a thorn on our side, excuse the pun. And on that occasion, Ed Fadeley gave him some comeuppance. I call it when Ed Fadeley outfoxed Mike Thorne.